make sure we all have a simultaneous translation device on your side. Okay, thank you. So we're gonna break that quietness, I guess. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us on this very crucial session, always for every year at the Summer Davos, or the annual meeting of the new champions on the Chinese economy. My name is Tian Wei. It's such an honor and pleasure to be sitting with a very distinguished panel here and all of you to discuss the Chinese economy. I'm a moderator and host of World Insight with Tian Wei on CGTN, and this is a joint session between World Economic Forum and CGTN. When we talk about the Chinese economy, I'm sure every one of you have many stories to tell, and every one of you have a comprehensive analysis to share. But it is also important to look at some of the most important factors and issues that are likely to impact the nature of this economy and its relations with all of us in the rest of the world. So as a result, I'm very happy to be joined by a strong panel. It's my honor to introduce them one by one, just by the sitting order maybe. So on my immediate left, Zhu Min, member of the Senior Expert Advisory Committee from China Center for International Economic Exchanges, and also member of the Board of Trustees with the World Economic Forum. Good to see you, Governor Zhu. Meanwhile, we want to welcome Ilham Kadri, the CEO of SciencePo, and from Belgium, and also from the International Business Council. She is running a chemical association based in Europe. Good to see you. Over there, we have Professor Jin Keyu, School from Business and Management with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, based in Hong Kong, SAR, China. Good to see you. Over there, Joe Guy, Chairman of Greater China Mackenzie and Company, also based in Hong Kong. Thank you. Last but certainly not least, Eswar Prasad, Professor from Cornell University, originally coming from the United States. Thank you so much, every one of you. So I see China, US, Europe, everyone is here, and of course a lot of voices also in the audience. I want to start by asking the most obvious question, I guess, in everyone's mind. That is, how much really geopolitics is having an impact on the nature and the immediate future of the Chinese economy? We've been hearing, great rivalry, or we've been hearing there are a lot of competitions, and also we have also seen antagonism signs here and there, but really exactly how much it is having our impact despite the narratives. Governor Zhu.
Well, geopolitical risk indeed has a big impact on economics, and not only for China, but for the whole world. First of all, if you're looking for the tariff, right, tariff upside down, and it really changes trade flows. It's very interesting. If you're looking for the China's exports to US in April, actually dropped 21%. When you have a tariff of 145, it's not easy to do business, right? But in May, when tariff drops and export growth become positive to 3.5. So indeed, the geopolitical risk really had the real impact on trade, on all the economic other issues as well. But more important is really the issue of uncertainty. We observed in the whole supply chain now, because the geopolitical uncertainties, the investment certainly stop, right? People just don't know, waiting to see. Because if you have a tariff will jump back and forth from 145 to whatever, right? A really difficulty for a business person to make a long-term decision. So investments are stalled, and the supply chain is repositioning. So where to go, how, is another big issue. So a lot of uncertainty from geopolitical risk areas also transform to real sectors. So I think that's the real things. Also, going further, the uncertainty also have an impact on the equity market.
Sure.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for the global equity market, it's really like a roller coaster, upside down, upside down all the time. For China, this time it's relatively stable, calm, because we learned from 2018 in the Trump 1.0 trade war. At that time, markets really bumping forward. So China this time prepare a quantitative easing macro policy at the floor to support confidence in the market. So market is really stable, but the confidence shaking is really have an impact on the financial sector as well.
I see. Go to you, Professor Prasad. I mean, you're originally coming from the US. I have to address you with that question, just to be fair. Despite of the narrative, we also see tremendous economic interdependence between China and the United States, while at the same time, there is leverage on both sides toward one another as well. So exactly how accurate is that narrative of antagonism, of rivalry only?
These are the two largest economies in the world, and they cannot sidestep each other. The question is whether they step on each other's toes or end up dancing with each other, and the latter prospect seems unlikely right now. But what we are learning from the outcomes of the negotiations we've seen between the two sides so far, it's not that either side possesses all the cards. Both sides can potentially inflict pain on each other. I think we would all like to be in a world where the two sides are collaborating and cooperating with each other, trying to think about what the choke points are. But the reality we face right now is that there is one critical element that is going to be very difficult to reconcile between the two countries. Trump has talked about reviving smokestack manufacturing in the US, but really, what we've seen from the Biden administration and so on is that the US wants a manufacturing revival in the new technology industries, electric vehicles, green energy, and so on. Mm-hmm. Now, the problem is that these are precisely the industries that China is counting on for its technological upgrading and moving up the value-added chain. And unfortunately, when you think about these new technologies, all the benefits of cooperation are falling prey to the fact that both countries now see this as a zero or even negative-sum game. And what we've seen in the progress of the negotiations is that there has been a whiplash in terms of which party seems to have the upper hand. Towards the beginning of the year, it looked like the US economy was in strong shape, China was floundering somewhat, and therefore the US had a stronger hand. That narrative has shifted. It is clear right now that the Chinese economy does seem to be doing quite well, not just in terms of exports, but even in terms of domestic demand. So that narrative has shifted. So the question is, how can we come to an agreement where the two sides can, in a sense, declare victory without bending the knee to each other? Yeah. It's going to be a very difficult process, but I think it's very good that we have discussions at the technical, policy, and leadership levels. That gives me hope.
Thank you. It is so easy to answer questions about the economy only from geopolitical perspectives. I see the earlier two speakers' answer mainly is trying to emphasize there are more nuance out there. But to you, Professor Jin, before I ask you that question, I want to give a little bit backdrop. Just yesterday, I personally went to a meeting in which there is a rising multilateral investment bank or development bank based in Beijing. And I see the members, more than 100 countries coming together. It is a very different scene when it comes to financial cooperation and development cooperation. And also, earlier managed to went to a trip in Central Asia and Southeast Asia. Find so much synergy out there and new development possibilities, both with China and with the rest of the world. So I'm wondering, when we talk about the Chinese economy, how much we should really jump out of this slope of only China-US, but more diversified opinions and perspective to see the real picture. Professor Jin.
If we describe the world commonly as politicized, polarized, and protectionist. I'd say, along with what you have laid out, the world pragmatism is still very much true and reigns true for the vast majority of the world, and economic pragmatism still I think is the core guiding principle. There is an absolute illusion of de-risking and decoupling, even among the two big major superpowers, US and China. I hear that all the time, but that's not what the data suggests. In terms of the direct trade and investment, yes, it has gone down between the two countries. But guess what? They are more embedded with each other indirectly than ever before. The countries that the US has been importing more, the four largest countries that have seen the greatest growth, actually happen to be the four economies that China is exporting more to. We're seeing that it's just a realignment of trade, a reorganization of trade. Chinese exports have gone from labor-intensive final goods to critical intermediate goods and parts exports. And US imports still has so much embodied Chinese parts. That doesn't go away. Yes, you're talking about economic fragmentation, geopolitical risk, and that is, truthfully, an order of magnitude higher than it was before in the 1970s, and uncertainty. But the reality is that economic interlinkages are still there. But as you were mentioning, I think we're moving really towards a recalibration of globalization, a lot led by regionalism, a lot led by regional production.
很多就是基于区域化的供应链以及新技术，多边主义其实没有消失呢，它可能会换一些形式，但是呢，地缘政治虽然重要。它还是跟经济合作共存。
Let's also go to our business community for their different voices. Go to lady first, maybe Ms. Kadri. Tell me more. Of course, you're from Europe, first of all, and secondly, what is the temperature that the business community is feeling, especially from where your field, chemical industry. Sometimes create new stories, by the way, these days. So how is that angle helping you to look at the Chinese economy today?
Yeah. Well, what we feel is the only certainty is uncertainty. Frankly, I've been 30 years in the chemical industry, 10 years as a CEO for listed companies. And it's very rare that, we wake up in the morning and we look at tariffs and then we start modeling what's the impact on our businesses and supply chain. So this is something we can do nothing about it. I think the chemical industry...
I'm not sure if I really agree with that, yeah. but go ahead.
At least I don't want my team to be handicapped and paralyzed because of this. I think more important in any company is to focus on what we control. So I think, and coming back to China, China is the chemical hub, industrial hub of the world. 50% of the chemical output in the world is coming from China. It's going to be 2/3 of the output by 2030. And in my 30 years in experience in the industry, China went from copying or imitation to now producing new champions in the chemical industry. And these are our customers, be it in electrification, the BYD, the CATL of the world, be it in lightweight materials like Comac in aviation, those are my customers as well, be it in connectivity, Xiaomi and others, right? So China is now, when you look at the EV, the LFP lithium-ion battery is the #1 lower total cost of ownership battery material in the world. And actually I invited Chinese players to come and invest in Europe because that's the best available technology. So while it's not easy the short term and navigating through the tariffs, right? And I hope there is light in the tunnel and there are conversations between the two countries. Frankly, even in Q1, GDP China grew 5%. They are still exporting and there is diversion of output, specifically in the chemical industry, into Europe. I was pleased to hear Premier Li and the government actually launching a consumption-led economy, domestic one in China, which is extremely important to address the capacity issues. But frankly, in the chemical industry, there are bright days through innovation and innovation-led economy, and China is going to become a champion in that in our industry.
All right, Mr. Guy, I know you have a lot to say when it comes to business community.
Yes, I think the question is around how geopolitics has been affecting China and Chinese companies. And I would say that if you go back into my clients, right, Chinese companies in China, I think once upon a time the world was very simple, right? I focus on making the best product at the best price available and innovate, and the world would take my product. These days, the world is a lot more complicated, right? As Premier Li said yesterday. And I think it's very interesting as to how the Chinese company has kind of moved on, right? The US is not the majority of the market, right? And there's actually a lot of trade corridors that's been emerging. So the most busy flight these days to Riyadh, right? To Dubai, right? ASEAN has been the biggest trade partner with China in the last few years. China LATAM is another trade corridor that's actually growing very quickly. So as I think Chinese companies, that were once the proud factory of the world, is now becoming kind of multinationals going into the world, right? And they're really playing around, how do I play into the politics, into the local communities? How do I become much more of a corporate citizen of the world? And I think you see that transition. So I think the Chinese companies, being the pragmatic, businessmen, right? I think that they're really looking into the much bigger world today. And so it's no longer only East-West, it's also China and many of these trade corridors that's been blossoming in the past few years.
Mr. Zhu?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting conversation. And you mentioned the geopolitical risk shock, and Ashwa mentioned the US-China dependency. I think this is a very important concept to understand the whole thing. We observed all the geopolitical risk in the front, very volatile, but at the bottom of the core economy, it's really the dependency define the whole situation.
Absolutely.
So it's very interesting. Let me give you a number. If we go back to Trump 1.0 in 2018, Trump launched 301 against China, which is really out of blue. At that time, China exports roughly $500 billion to the United States, import $200 billion from the United States, and they have a $300 billion surplus. You know how much is today? Today, China continues to export $500 billion to the United States and import $200 billion from the United States, and they have a $300 billion surplus from the United States. That's to show, number one, the competitiveness of Chinese company, as our McKinsey friends mentioned. The second two, the dependency between the two economies. We need each other, so we trade and remain, right? So I think understand the fundamental economic strengths and dependency in these two huge economies. I think it's absolutely important. So when we see the geopolitical risk volatility, we see the shock uncertainties, but we do have confidence on ourselves because of competitiveness, and we do believe dependency is the foundation for the globalization. And we think globalization was there, is there, here, and it will be there. I think this is very important.
All right, after that very firm statement, Mr. Guy, I still want to ask you about that, Joe. You earlier only touched on Chinese companies, but I also want to know global companies here in China or with China. How does that work?
I think for multinationals, what's going on right now has affected them in a very big way, right? I do think that whether you're a US company or whether you're a European company, and remember, multinationals not only US and Europe, right? There are also many other multinational companies around. But I do think that for them, as they look at this world, it has become a lot more complicated. Remember that the Chinese supply chain is unmatched in many different segments, right? So as we found, there are many different segments where China is like 80% or 90%, right, of actually the world supply. So for them, I think that this has become a little bit of a, yes, China plus one, but China plus one also means that China is still very, very important. And I think that in the last few years, I think that most multinationals started off with, well, let's find the plan B. But the plan B ended up having China being a pretty big component of the Plan B, right? So a few years ago, I just said that, the next China is actually still a lot of China. And I think that that's a little bit the dependency that Julian talked about. But it's a little bit also where for the same value for money, for the same cost efficiency in many different categories, this is something that actually will be very, very difficult. A lot of people are trying to say, well, let's build over here. But you know what? The equipment comes from China, the raw materials come from China, the supply chain comes from China, and then everything else seems to be, well, as you count it all up, the value add at the end, still a lot comes from China as well, although there's no direct export, yeah? So with multinationals, it has been a little bit of a rejuggling of this, some diversification, but ultimately, it's hard to completely diversify away.
Pragmatically speaking, yeah. Ilham, I want you to also help us understand this, because once again, there is a narrative. The narrative is everybody's leaving and this and that. I'm not trying to do a propaganda session, by the way, here. I'm just trying to hear, people really on the ground, what they are facing with and what the reality is, so that we have more real evidence before we go to any conclusion. So Ilham, tell me more about how do you see what Joe just mentioned?
So I lead ScienceCo. ScienceCo is a global company. We are a 7 billion euro company. 40% of our business is in Americas, 35% in Asia, 15% in China. And the smallest region where we sit, where our headquarters sit, is in Europe. In China, we've been in China since the 80s. And China, and I think you said it very well, this is not the end of globalization. This is an evolution. That's how I see it for my company. Second, when we learned in China, when you are in China, you rather learn how to compete. It's tough, not only for foreign companies. The West will be sometimes extremely wrong to think China is competing against the West and foreign companies. Actually, between Chinese companies is tough, right? So competition is part of the DNA here. Even my employees.
Tell me more about it. I'm sure a lot of audience
are fast competing with the rest of our employees. And by the way, they win most of the time. So it's not the point. You rather be on your toes. You rather ensure now that innovation is happening. Which is the real truth for specialties, because specialty is a specialty till it's become a commodity. So we learned in the past years how to live in China. So two perspectives. One, inside China, I truly believe that there will be more onshoring, right? Most of the companies, and now we're in my hat as the president of the Global Chemical Association, are looking at what to onshore and how to onshore it. So we need stable environments, which China is giving us. We need protection of IP, which have been, really progressing well, and we need more of this. We need financing, and the Chinese banks are extremely strong these days. I was talking in the lounge, we may be even raising bonds in China. The second piece is outside China, and I talked about the new Chinese champions who are going to invest. It may not be in the US because it's not popular these days for China to invest in the US, but it can be in Europe, in Latin. You talked about this. So I invited my dear customers in electrification, to come to Europe and bring their best available technology and bring those resilient value chain into Europe. And this is an opportunity for Chinese transplants, but for Europe, who is struggling, by the way, to bring, the best available technology to fulfill its Green Deal, type of ambitions.
Thank you very much. So what about that technology? I mean, in terms of green technology, in terms of artificial intelligence related, we see not only competition, but also how much momentum this has created in China's economy, since that is our topic today. So Professor Jin, Ke, can you help us to understand things, the symbolic existence of DeepSeek as a opening of open source in AI field. It seems a lot of the logic of competition and cooperation has changed, So how is that already changed the logic? Help us to understand the realities and the potential of the Chinese economy.
I think that DeepSeek is only the beginning of a massive wave of scale-based, cost-reductive, leading-edge innovation, where China has a unique advantage of combining both leading-edge technology and massive productive capability and scale all in one, manufacturing capacity. But we have to realize that even if the US could be the leader in inventions and breakthroughs, production and diffusion of technology is just as, if not more important, for the benefit of the economy. And if you look at China's recent AI Plus program, which is trying to push AI into every plausible sector, robotics, that kind of combination, the digital economy really at the frontier of the world, almost accounting for 10% of GDP. This is kind of all-inspiring. There's a little bit of a discrepancy, and I think there's a kind of a dichotomy here in China, the Chinese economy, both between this huge technological dynamism that we've seen, maybe thanks to the U.S. Controls, export controls, and the economic softness, as well as the dichotomy between the macro, which can, let's say, reach 5% GDP target, and the micro sustained confidence issues. It is a dichotomy, but we've seen is that I just want to say that technological breakthroughs often happen in times of crisis, not in times of comfort.
Yeah. There's an urgency, and there's the change. Aswar?
So DeepSeek has certainly shifted the narrative, and one thing that is clear to me, having come to the winter Davoses frequently, is that relative to last year, the sense of confidence that I get, I don't mingle with the Chinese masses, but policymakers that I speak to, businessmen I speak to, there is a definite shift. It's DeepSeek, the meeting that President Xi Jinping had with entrepreneurs, which seems to have shifted the balance between the state and the private enterprises, with the notion that private enterprises are once again back in favor. Now, the question is whether this moment, which I think is potentially a very promising one for China, because as Professor Jin pointed out, China is very good at scaling up these innovations and in terms of diffusing them in a way that you can get very good productivity growth, which really has to be the answer for China with declining demographics and so on. In the US, what is interesting is that in the last few quarters, we've actually seen productivity doing quite well. We don't quite know if it is an AI effect, but it seems like that is a plausible interpretation. And if China wants to rely on productivity growth, that is certainly a potential answer. Yeah. Now, the question is whether the rest of the economy, especially the financial system, is going to be set up in a way that you can channel resources to take advantage of that. And that, I think, is where this moment is really important, because on the surface, everything looks calm, but the question is whether this moment is being used to push forward these deeper structural reforms or to pull back from them because things look calm on the surface. And that, I think, is the real issue at this juncture for the Chinese government.
I want to go to that point a bit later in detail as well, but focusing on the technology for the moment. This is not about just the Chinese economy. It is also about the rest of the world. From scaling law earlier about pumping in as much money as possible and only a few monopoly, to everybody now can jump onto the wagon. Maybe opening source is still a bit lag behind the closed source in terms of the best of technologies, but it is close. So it means everybody can actually have a say or have a possibility. So Min, as a result of that, what could that mean for the synergy among economies? Since our topic, once again, is not about AI, it's about Chinese economy. So how will this momentum bring in more possibilities or already bringing in different alternatives? Please.
I think we're going to see huge impact from AI to whole economy. I do believe DeepSeek is a game changer, as Ke and Ashwar mentioned. For me, I observed the AI in some way closely. In the past 10 years, I put them into two phases. I think the first phase is AR, which the aha moments for AR is open AI. When OpenAI have ChatGPT 2, 3, 4, we say, waha, we have a new thing. It's completely new, we don't know. But OpenAI, it really, as you say, more different. So you need a big scale, you need pumping a lot of money. But suddenly, DeepSeek jumps, right? DeepSeek is smaller.
Yeah. We're not doing advertisement for one company, by the way. It's just one of those interesting phenomena.
Fact, right?
Yeah,
No.
yeah, indeed. Yeah.
I think it's very important to understand. So it's much easier for company to use DeepSeek within the industry or within the company.
Right. There are other alternatives as well, open source as well. It seems
open source is also important, because it's not easy to use OpenAI. Too expensive and too big, and you have to surrender all your data to the OpenAI centers. You feel uncomfortable. So when DeepSeek emerges, you have I call it an AI plus. With the OpenAI, with the open resource,
open source.
I think it's really changed the whole things. I imagine with the huge pool of engineers China has today, with all the massive rich scenario China have in industry, in the next 24 months, I imagine to see 100 DeepSeek type of software were emerging. And also good news is when DeepSeek emerging on the software, now we have Huawei produce the servers, which is good enough to support a DeepSeek software. And China have a data policy roughly 18 months ago called the Data 20th, and allow the data to be an asset, to be a resource to use by all the company. And this year, Chinese authorities encourage local government to public all the local public data for private company to use in the productions. So in the AI, just three most important resources, right? Computing power, algorithm, and the data. We have the data policy in place already. We have a Huawei on the computing power. We have a DeepSeek on the software, algorithm. So I see a big wave for AI plus is coming. So that will have a huge impact on the whole economy, and not only on the computing science.
Right. A lot of sitting here actually are coming from the tech sector. I'm sure they have better questions than mine later in our discussion. Go to you, Ilham. Also about technology upgrading. How much possibility and potential does it provide to us, this logic change?
Yeah. It's amazing.
In terms of Chinese economy, once again.
Yeah, and before talking about, the Gen AI, let me give you an example. In the battery business, we know very well, half of the cost on an EV car just 10 years ago, 20 years ago, was the battery. Half of the cost was not affordable to many. Now it's single digits, and it's getting lower and lower because we could, with innovation, build smaller batteries, higher energy density, more driving distance, less driving angst, and this is affordable. And while Tesla put a battery on a wheel, many Chinese OEMs now and customers are reimagining the car. We have developments with NIO here where they have interchangeable batteries. So you don't buy your battery, you lease it.
Right.
Coming to Gen AI is fascinating. I wish I'm younger. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I did my PhD in chemistry, I would use Gen AI applied to my science.
So how is that?
Gen AI,
how is that related to the economy?
The industry and the economy. Anywhere for our corporation, we believe there will be 20 to 30% less full-time equivalents in many of our departments, be it ITIS, global business services, etc., communication, marketing, etc. Gen AI is fascinating. I'm a digital immigrant, so I'm learning, as my age, relearning actually these things. But what is amazing is that out of unstructured data, it makes sense out of it. And it helps us without building, a massive infrastructure to use it to have well-educated decisions. Okay. So we are applying it everywhere. Mm-hmm. The biggest potential is in our research and development. Because here we are, your notebook becomes digital, become available to everyone in the world, and you can cut your innovation times, which can go up to 2, 3, 4 years in the chemical industry, down to 6 months.
Right.
And this is amazing.
And of course, that would work into the eventual economic growth, as our topic is.
Absolutely.
Having said that, we already spent half of our time trying to tackle some of the long existing narratives, which a lot of you have already given insights. I'm sure it's food for thought for many sitting here. Let's spend the rest of our session on more the realities of the Chinese economy today and what might be the remedies. Now, we have seen the importance of consumption power. And when it comes to the Chinese economy, consumption is the biggest word people would come to mind. But how much enthusiasm of consumption is there among the Chinese consumers today? What are preventing them? What might be helping them? Joe, you are on the ground running on those issues every day. Tell me more, what is the reality today?
Well,
as we speak, because things are changing every few weeks.
Yeah, I think that we have talked about the Chinese consumer confidence for a while now and been waiting for that to have some upside. Look, I think that, it's a transition, right? We went from an economy that was growing, salaries were rising, employment, out of universities were booming, right, into something that is a little bit more of a change, right, for Chinese consumers, for parents, right, and also for people who own property, right? The real estate market doesn't look to be as booming as it was before. So I do think in the last couple of years, there has been a little bit of a management of expectations for Chinese consumers. And I think that has led to a little bit more of a muted confidence in terms of, do I spend for the future? Do I need to save more? Do I need to think a little bit around, how do I think about, my investments for the future? However, what we have seen in the last 1 year, I would say, is that a lot of people talk about, are we trading down? I don't think Chinese consumers are trading down. I think Chinese consumers are very savvy consumers, are trading for same quality for lower price, okay? They are not sacrificing quality because they are actually in the Chinese competitive environment. There are plenty of substitutes, right? And actually what you're seeing is a lot of mobility, right? And changes around the supply of what is out there. I think Chinese consumers have actually enjoyed higher quality of life, perhaps with same or cheaper prices. And that's where you see the numbers where, hey, are they trading down? And I wouldn't say trading down. I would say they're not sacrificing quality, but they're very savvy customers. Now that leads to, last point, is that in the competition, right, around companies, right, there is a ferocious competition going on right now because everyone's trying to figure out, like, in this large, group of customers that are all looking for substitutes, right? Value for money. The value for money segment is a segment that's been growing, and that growth is actually very, very inspiring. So I would say the Chinese consumer, they're not back to where they were, but they're changing, but they're still very, very robust.
Aswar?
This is a wonderful time for the Chinese economy with all these innovations potentially leading to greater productivity growth. And it is a scary time for Chinese citizens because, there is a prospect of much advancement in technology, interesting new jobs being created, entire new industries being created. But at the same time, the question is, where is the employment going to come from that offsets what happens with the declining industries? And unemployment has already been a problem for China for a while. So if you think about this part of the economy that is very dynamic, certainly that creates a lot of potential for the future. But we are living in the present. It would be wonderful if AI, for instance, could solve the housing sector problems. That is something that weighs on the entire economy. It restrains consumption. So if you think about what needs to be done to create an enabling environment for this technology to work, there is a lot of hard work to be done. I mean, the problems, the structural problems in the Chinese economy are well known. The housing market continues to perform not very well. The financial sector continues to be beset by a number of issues. Local government finances are under stress. So what I think, again, is that the government should see this time of relative calm on the surface, as I mentioned, on the macroeconomic level, rather than just bracing for trouble that might come from the US or from elsewhere, to start thinking about the longer-term goals and what is necessary to accomplish them. And for that, I think some deeper-rooted structural reforms which seem to have been taken off the table for now, really need to be brought back on the table. And with that, I think consumers might end up becoming much more confident, because I think right now, the brief surge in confidence that we have seen, thanks to the shift in narrative, might be difficult to sustain if you don't get the macroeconomics right. So technology is great, but you need macroeconomics to support it.
Yeah. Of course, when you ask a question, once again, you better give the answer when it comes to microeconomy or structure. What exactly is it? I'm going to come back to you about that. Ke Yu, also your thoughts on this. Go ahead.
We can talk about technological supremacy and AI and all this, but China is never going to be a rich country unless it becomes a big consumer country. And that's what we have seen the likes of South Korea, Japan be able to make that transition, right? Before we talk about consumption, we have to talk about jobs, right? We have to talk about social spending on healthcare, education.
And demographic changes too.
Demographic changes, but really here is, if you look at the political economy of China, it's geared towards production. It's subsidizing production. It's all about technology, competitiveness, production. And by the way, I want to push back on the issue of how Chinese goods are so competitive and everyone's still importing Chinese goods. China's going to have a real problem, not just with the US, but with the rest of the world. Because it's no longer about just efficiency, it's about harmony. It's about giving other countries also an opportunity to be part of the global supply chain and everything, in every single sector. So China better raise its internal consumption and to harmonize these kind of relationships. But on that, I think there's a real shift, and we were going to discuss about the stimulus policies that is moving from supply-based more on demand-based. I think it will be fantastic if the yardstick competition on the local governments can put consumption as one of the measurements of success. I think that China is really transitioning from an old industry to a new industry, and that the stimulus needs to have a sustained effect, an endogenous effect that becomes a driver. And where are the opportunities? Well, first off, we talk about jobs. The jobs are in the services. But service sector only employs about 47% of the Chinese employment and only 50% of GDP. You got to open those up. The new generation, I totally agree with the fact they're all about consuming. They're all about leisure, about work-life balance, and they have created all these new entrepreneurial, innovative ways to consume and to develop the local economy rather than line up in the manufacturing factories, to develop that local sphere. So we got to give them the opportunity. And lastly, I think the opportunities are now in the second, third tier cities. We're seeing a massive wave of talent moving back to the local areas where there are actually more opportunities, whether it's in high-end manufacturing, local services, but this distribution creates this potentially endogenous momentum.
As well, since you already checked all the key words, real estate, the local government, and the restructuring of the Chinese economy, you have to provide some solutions as well.
So if you think about structural problems, you cannot solve them with macroeconomic policies. But macroeconomic policies can actually be a very useful lubricant. At this stage, monetary policy, I think, is not going to get much traction when the problem that you face is confidence, because household consumption did do relatively well recently, but it's not in a durable fashion. Investment overall has been doing well, but private investment is not doing very well. So I don't think cheaper money or more liquidity is the answer. But fiscal policy could play a useful role in bridging this gap between dealing with longer-term structural problems as well as boosting shorter-term growth. A few examples of that, if you think about using money to strengthen the social safety net, something that Professor Jin alluded to, improving center-provincial local fiscal relations, because local government finances are very stressed right now, thinking about using money to reduce the corporate and personal tax burden. All of these are reforms that I think would really help in terms of moving the economy in the right direction, but would also have a good short-term growth boost. So I think the bridge between the short-term and the long-term could well lie through fiscal policy.
Min, you have two hats. I mean, not only think tank, but also earlier as a former banker. So how is that policy? We have seen over the past 2 years, combinations of policies come out from the Chinese policymakers from time to time. And it's been having some very positive impact. But how fundamentally this is likely to give the momentum to vitality of this economy, which everybody is aware of. There is tremendous vitality out there. How to fundamentally boost that and make sure people feel this confidence to work with China for longer term?
I think that fundamentally the most important thing is we have to understand consumption is the most big challenge for China today, and it has a great potential for the future Chinese economy. I think we have to understand it, so politically understand. So we need to put a lot of efforts and on the consumption, put the macro policy to support the consumption. I think this is the fundamental issue. The good news is I think the government realized that, put a lot of efforts in that now. Let me go a little details, if you give me 30 to 90 seconds. Chinese household consumption account 39.4% today. Low, absolutely. There are many reasons I'm not going to explain, right? But it's low. Given the current geopolitical situation, given China want to move into a strong economy and a future high-income economy, China have to boost domestic consumptions. But Chinese consume material goods account for 32.2% of GDP already, which is not low, which is in line with international standards when you have a roughly $13,000 per capita GDP. Very simple, because as a human being, you consume for the material goods always have a limitation. So on the other way, it's a service sector. Yeah. It's almost unlimited area, right? So how can we open the service sector due to reform, let people to consume more service? I think that's the real challenge if we want to do the consumption. So on the demand side, yeah, exactly. On the demand side, I think the government is doing, Asia mentioned, Kei mentioned a few things. Number one, if you're looking for this year's budget, it's roughly 1% of GDP on the social expenditures to put building a future and also today more solid social safety nets on the pensions, healthcare, Medicare, and the retirement things, make sure people feel safe, they can consume. I think this is very important. The second macro policy is really on the job and income. The policy is to make sure the individual income growth levels in line with GDP ratios, and which is today. And in the rural areas, income level increase over GDP level now. I think that's good. So you have to have money, as Kei mentioned, job creation. This is really the top priority.
And how?
This
service sector or elsewhere?
No, this is all the jobs. So now try to get all the service sectors and also on the tech sectors to create a job. It's the number one task for everyone, create a job, expanding pools, and particularly for 10 million fresh graduates from college in the coming month. I think this is a lot of policy in place. But they're also on the supply side. This is on demand side. On supply side, it's really important to do a reform in service sector. We don't consume very much healthcare. We don't consume very much on education. And Chinese people pay a lot of attention on education, right? We don't consume on entertaining, on tourists. So all those things have a huge potentials. But we need to get the price right. We need to get the regulatory framework right. We need to get the market, the business environment right, so private companies and the companies can move in to compete with each other. And also the foreign company can move in to compete with each other.
And the products that the consumers really desire, not just the product put there and then say consume, right?
Yeah,
as simple as that. Yeah. So Joe, go to you.
Yeah, look, I think that one of the things that we have talked a bit about this in the society these days is around this vicious competition going on, right, among companies. I'll come back to why that's very important, because I do think that's very important for employment, right? I do think right now, one of the things that we have not talked about is DeepSeek has created a lot of confidence in the capital markets and in some segments of the tech sector. DeepSeek has not created confidence in the young people and for employment. In fact, DeepSeek has created some anxiety around, hey, if I have DeepSeek, if I can be much more efficient, do I need these young people anymore? In fact, I think that's one of the things where I think we got to make sure that somehow companies, right, are coming together to kind of figure out, like, if I have a lot of confidence for the future, I can do capital expenditure, I'm going to expand my business, so therefore I'm going to have more employment. I think that's actually where
that's a global question, isn't it?
The traditional employment for young people actually has been the private sector, right? Has been the internet companies, has been these sectors that actually you have seen the least amount of recruitment in recent years, right? In the past few years. And I think that's where I think what we come back to a little bit is I think capital allocation is very important. I think in the past, right, when we say, well, right now I'm very afraid of, well, let's go into Gen AI. There's massive capital going in there, vicious competition, no progress to be made, and so therefore that comes back into salary levels are low, no employment, right? And that becomes a little bit this vicious cycle. I think we got to get beyond this, where we have respect, return on assets, return on capital. We got to get better in some capital allocation from the capital markets and from the banking system.
What does it take what does it take to change it?
I think that will take investors and private investors to be, first of all, be more part of this, and I think the banks to become better capital allocators among the private sector. I think that is actually very, very important.
Ilham.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating conversation. I think China moved from being in the industry side a capacity leader to capacity and innovation and digital leader. What does it take to fix that is to address the ugly balance sheet. Indeed, you're right, the returns are lower, expectations are lower than what we are asked for, double-digit return on capital employed for foreign companies, listed companies in Europe and the US. So, and China will do it by addressing the overcapacity, and obviously domestic resilience consumption will help. And I love the harmony word, I love it, actually I'm gonna steal it from you. It has to happen in harmony with other regions, because at one point of time, it's not even the US stopping import through tariff shocks. Yeah. Europe is gonna also build some barriers at one point of time. So we need that resiliency of domestic
not only the developed economy, but also the global south as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the global south, and build good neighbors, stable neighbors. I'm African born, I grew up in Morocco. Africa is the last emerging continent available to us. China is investing in Africa. You need to do it the right way from A to Z, onshoring, profitable value chain. Number two, real estate, I think it was mentioned. Number three, decline in demographics with unemployment, where you need to recreate new jobs. You talk a lot about deep sea, so I'm going to mention it. But in industry, we need reskilling and upskilling, because the way we manufacture is very different. So don't forget that the industry needs these re-education, upskilling, and reskilling. And that's the new creation of jobs.
I really hate to cut our conversation short. I think we can let this continue for several hours, and I still feel refreshed. But there are more refreshing questions and comments coming from our audience. We only have less than 10 minutes to go. Why don't we open it to the floor? And everyone just very briefly, who you are, the question, or a brief comment. No elaboration into a speech, please. And please raise your hands. I try to call upon different regions. So the gentleman on the very first line. Yes, you with the glasses, please. Yes, the number three on the line. Yes. So we just collect some questions, we answer together, so that will save time. Who you are and question or comments.
Tianwei, I'm Joel, as you know. Joel Ruet from the Bridge Tank with the glasses. Quick questions on how can banks become better capital allocators.
Okay.
Is it through regulation? Is it through their shareholders understanding those opportunities, or is it through their models of computing the world, their models of assessing what's the economy? Can AI use in that?
Thank you very much.
From the regulator to AI.
Bank as good allocator, how could that happen? Next question, maybe we go to the central region. Any questions from here? If not, I skip to another one. Okay, maybe the gentleman at the very, I can't see, at the very back. Oh, the lady at the very back, yes. And I'll call on different regions from.
For the moment, I'm a woman. I'm Monica Toft. Great panel. My question is the rebalancing, recalibration of the Chinese economy, the winners and the losers, from export-driven to consumption and services. How's that going to play out?
Okay, this is a continuing conversation we had already on the stage, but let's that continue. And okay, one more lady over here. Sorry, I will give also the other half of the sky more question possibility. This lady at the very front line, yes. And in the central region, is there anyone reaching? No, okay, please.
Basic Stand-Up and Group, Joburg. I'd like somebody to please reflect for us what you see if you look a little bit further forward on the demographic side with the aging population, which hasn't been a topic yet.
Okay, thank you. Central region, no? Wow. Okay, one more. Maybe we have one more. Wow. Okay, so two more, and then we call it. Yeah. Okay. This gentleman on the very side. You know, the lights is a little bit dark in the audience, so I may not be able to see you.
I'm Juan, and I'm a global shaper. My question is, what do you think are the barriers and the most effective strategies for China to opening up?
Opening up, yeah. The new stage of opening up, yeah, okay. Thank you. And the gentleman over there, I promised a gentleman over there. Sorry for the, yes, please.
I'm S.C. from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technologies. My question is related to the innovation capabilities of China, because there is some technology it cannot get from the other countries. Then China have no choice but to develop its own. If you compare with the demands...
Okay, the question will be, please. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the internal development of technology, whether it's a par with the competing other technology, other countries.
Thank you very much. So we got only 5 minutes to go. I guess we just collect all these questions for so far. I'm sure you have other interaction possibilities with our distinguished panelists. So one is about the continuation, the discussion for changing the dynamism of the Chinese economy from exports to a more consumption. Anyone to have more to say? Very briefly, Ke Yu, one sentence or two. Continue that conversation.
I think we are in a transition where, you know, the old industries are dying, the new industries are emerging. There's going to be a lot of volatility in the interim, and yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you.
I think China is on track, moving into a more domestic consumption economy. It will take a long time.
Okay.
So we will see.
It's a transition. It takes some time.
I think China needs, in the industry-wise, to really prune its assets, low profitability. Let's not go and find ugly business elsewhere. So pruning, like we do in our own businesses, improve the returns and have higher ambition on the return on capital employed.
Okay.
And then opening up.
We're going to go to that. We
okay.
just, for now, on the changes of the structure. Bank allocation?
That's a good question. We need, obviously, more effective allocation on the capital, but it's not only on bank, it's the whole financial market. Because the nature for the capital to the tech sectors, capital to the green sector, number one, you need a huge scale, long-term, high risk, right? For those things, we need more from financial market, bonds market, equity market. I think this is a more important thing.
All right. Aswa?
You definitely need broader, better financial markets, but that means improving corporate governance. It means changing incentive structures in the financial system. And for the banks in particular, it means taking care of the legacy problems that still constrain their lending to the dynamic parts of the economy.
And Joe, something that Aswar hasn't said.
Yes, I think what is important is actually the banks should not be the bulk of actually capital allocation. Right, we should move the banks right into the capital markets, right? And I think that's actually what you see in the Hong Kong IPOs recently. That's a good sign, and we should go further in that direction.
Further opening up. Wow, what a grand topic. But we need to tackle that within 1 minute, maybe. So shall I call upon my good friend Ke Yu to start that? Crispy answer.
There's a huge opportunity in light of what's happening in the U.S. For the Chinese internationalization of the RMB and opening up rapidly of financial services.
Okay, and Ilham, would you like to say something? Or?
Definitely. Two things. targeting other regions, other countries in Asia, but also in Europe, and onshoring the best available technology in China there. And number 2, IP protection.
Okay. Wow, we only have 1 minute left. What are we going to talk about? Innovation. So what about the nature of China's innovation? If we could have several answers.
Maybe just one idea on this one is that I think China has some great innovators on the hardware side. I think what is actually the next version is going to be on the software side and on the IP side. I think that's actually where you got to look out for that.
Yeah, I think the fundamental is China is going to lead AR plus wave, not only for China, but for the whole world.
Absolutely.
So be prepared. The big wave is coming. Brace the new world. It will be excellent, excellent new tech world.
Sorry.
Yeah, could you please?
Also related to the winner versus loser question, what we have seen in the data, the ones that are most protected from trade wars and geopolitical uncertainties are those that have their own IP, R&D, skill, upstream, but the ones that suffer the most are the labor-intensive ones.
The promise, the potential is great. What the government needs to do is provide the right enabling environment.
You guys are great. How could you answer so complicated questions within 20 seconds? If I could ask a favor from you, 10 seconds if you can, give a conclusion in your perspective, our topic today, China's economy analyzed. Go from you as well.
It's a promising time, and the key question is whether the government will keep its eye on the long term, because there are many deeper issues that need to be resolved to make sure that both the short term and the long term look promising.
Thank you. 10 seconds. Absolutely. Joe.
I think the great stuff will go very far, but we got to watch out for the disparity, right, and the equality on this.
Thanks.
Present challenges and future opportunities.
I'm bullish about China. I think it's a new era for new champions and structuring the old and building an efficient, innovative, disruptive new.
Like that.
I think we are currently in a very volatile and a changing world.
Yeah.
So don't always look into the past, but look into the future and breathe the future. It will be a wonderful future.
I'm thinking about that jazz song already. But thank you. With that note, we're coming to the end of this session, China's economy analyzed. I want to thank our panelists for being so cooperative and innovative in coming up with their answers, and also a very, very participating audience. You know, when we say China's economy analyzed, this is not the conclusion. This is an ongoing process, and we are all contributing to that process. So thank you so much for all your attention and participation. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you. Can we have a photo together? Aswar, can we have a
Good afternoon. Great to see you, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
And we're so privileged to have the newly re-elected Prime Minister, Lawrence Wong, with us of Singapore. This is Prime Minister's first visit also to China. And,
as Prime Minister.
Yeah, as Prime Minister.
I'm no stranger to China.
No.
I've come to China almost every year.
And you speak the language, huh?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. And I think Singapore is also the largest investor in China
yes,
still.
Yes, we are.
And,
for 12 consecutive years.
Yeah. And I think you were also in Beijing and meeting with President Xi Jinping.
Yes.
Yeah. That went well?
It went very well.
Yeah. And the mood was good? The mood was good?
Well, we have a close partnership, very broad and substantial, a very unique partnership. We call it an all-round, high-quality, future-oriented partnership.
Wow. That sounds very substantial.
It sounds better in Mandarin.
Does it? A lot of things sounds better in Mandarin. Also when you say slow is fast, you know, or a crisis, I think has a double meaning.
Yes, 危机.
Yeah. So maybe Prime Minister, I know that you have a few initial thoughts, and then we'll have a dialogue for half an hour.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Birgit, for the introduction. I think we are meeting at a time of profound changes in the world. After the end of the Cold War, the world saw an unprecedented period of global integration, characterized by open markets, rapid trade, free trade, rapid movement of capital, goods, ideas, and people across borders. And this brought benefits to many people, and for a long time this vision held true. Davos embodied this vision, a vision that global integration would deliver peace and shared prosperity. Unfortunately, I think the world is changing. And we see over the years more pressures. Discontent against globalization has risen. It started way back. I remember in 1999 when the WTO was held in Seattle. You already had demonstrations and protests there. But since then, year after year, you see in advanced economies, cities being destroyed because factories are closed, livelihoods get disrupted, jobs are displaced. And in more recent years, because of COVID and the concerns over supply security, because of conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, now concerns about security have risen. And we are in a very different position today. The global norms, global rules are weakening, global institutions are weakening, and economic nationalism is replacing win-win cooperation. For small countries like Singapore, we are worried because we have limited options, we have limited bargaining power, and we risk being marginalized. But even bigger countries, I think, will have challenges dealing and operating in such a new environment because it will be harder for everyone to deal with common threats, be it pandemics, climate change, or financial shocks. So I think our response has to be collectively to try and still harness forces that will bring people together, promote integration, bring down barriers, and strengthen multilateralism. Multilateralism that is more resilient, more inclusive, and better suited to the realities of our time. So Singapore will do our part in this endeavor, whether it's forging partnerships, updating global rules, or advancing dialogue, working together with partners like the WEF. The efforts may seem small and incremental, but if like-minded countries everywhere were to do our part, then collectively I think we can make a difference. And then step by step, hopefully we can lay the groundwork for a new and more stable global order in time to come.
Thank you. I think Prime Minister deserves an applause for that. Picking up on your last point, what kind of order or more stable system could we foresee in the future? I think we had one world order after the Cold War. And that order is not really there anymore, but we don't know what is coming. The Premier lead this morning said we have to avoid the law of the jungle, or the jungle growing back. But how do you see this new system of cooperation? You could see a more multipolar system, but at the same time you see soft power replaced with strong power. You see interest spheres also being developed. So multipolarity is one thing, but aren't we seeing more a system of interest sphere? And that for smaller, medium-sized countries would be quite a challenge.
It is going to be a challenge. I think, frankly, no one knows what this new order will look like. It's still very early days. We are in a period of transition and a period of evolution. There will be critics of today's system that say it's good that now the system is changing. But I would also say let's have a care. Let's not be too quick to cheer, because what is the alternative? So we have to think through very carefully how we can evolve a better system. And I'll give you two examples of global institutions that have come under pressure, but over the years have been able to reform and upgrade themselves. First, the IMF. I started work as a young economist in the 90s, so I still remember vividly the 1997 Asian financial crisis. People till today call it the IMF crisis. Because the IMF came in with strict austerity, one-size-fits-all measures, and there was a reaction. But look, over the years, the IMF has reformed, it's updated itself, it's customized its approaches, become more responsive, more transparent, and it has taken into account local circumstances and context. It's an improved, upgraded IMF. To be clear, there's still reforms to be done. For example, and in particular, where it comes to the shareholding and governance structure, which still reflects a world after World War II and needs to be adjusted to better reflect the realities of today's economy. But that's one work that needs to be done and can be done in order for the IMF to maintain its credibility and legitimacy. Second, the WTO. It has brought about free trade, a rules-based trading system which has benefited many countries, but there is a feeling that the system is not working as well. And indeed, some of the WTO rules have lagged behind the realities of today's economy, particularly in digital trade. So what do? And again, the response is not to jettison the rules, but to think about how it can be improved. And a few countries, like-minded countries, Singapore working with Japan and Australia, we have come together to initiate a joint initiative on e-commerce. And after 5 hard years of negotiation, today more than 70 countries have agreed on the first set of rules for digital trading. It's the building block for the first set of global rules on digital trade. And I give these illustrations to show that it is possible to update, evolve, improve the multilateral system and global institutions that we have today. It is painstaking work, but there is no alternative. A new system does not just appear by magic. You have to work at it. And with creative, pragmatic solutions, bringing along like-minded countries, if we are able to start some of this work, do the building blocks one by one, then in time to come, others that are more ready can join in. So this is what we would call a flexible multilateralism. It's not about ad hoc array of different rules, but starting first, laying the building blocks, and eventually others can join in, and we can steer progress in the right direction.
It's very interesting, this notion of flexible multilateralism, because congratulations on getting an agreement around, I think, what they call these plurilaterals on this e-commerce. It means that countries that have common interests come together, and now we have more than 70 of them, and forming like trade rules in e-commerce.
That's right.
And later on, it can be more and more countries contributing or being part of it, and then it could even turn into something that is multilateral.
Yes.
But with all these kind of more plurilaterals and also bilateral trade agreements,
get too complicated,
and regional ones and all that, don't we end up with a big spaghetti bowl then?
Yes, there is that concern. But again, I ask, what is the alternative?
Exactly.
Do nothing? It cannot be do nothing and hope that someday along the way something new emerges out of nowhere. I think we have to start from somewhere. And if we start with like-minded countries, putting in place some basic building blocks, but always with a view that whatever we do, it is open, it's inclusive. Others may not be ready to join, but in time to come they can join, and we can multilateralize these efforts.
Have also Singapore changed its approach? I think traditionally you were doing more trade agreements under multilateral agreements like WTO, but have you now embarked on bilateral trade agreements, mega regional ones? Are you know, some countries are really getting a lot of agreements there. I think number one is Chile with like 100 of them.
Well, we did start with many bilateral FTAs too.
Yeah.
And then over time, these FTAs became the building blocks for a more robust multilateral system. Yeah. Today, when we look at the situation and some of the rising barriers to trade, again, our response would be to still work at reforming and updating the WTO, but in parallel, we are engaging with like-minded countries to find ways in which we can strengthen our trade and investment links. And we start with the countries nearest to us. Yeah. Malaysia and Indonesia, for example, we have a special economic zone now with Johor in Malaysia. We are working with Indonesia, where there's a free trade zone in the Riau Islands just next to us. So we have very close links with our closest neighbors. But even within Southeast Asia, we have a very close link with Vietnam. The Prime Minister of Vietnam is here. We have a connectivity agreement. We are doing something like more than 20 industrial parks in Vietnam. And then for the whole of ASEAN, we are looking at ways to better integrate ASEAN and make us more united, be able to offer a more competitive single market to investors. So that's within ASEAN. But outside of our region, we are also engaging different blocs. We already have very close links with China, Japan, Korea, India in Asia. But we are engaging outside of Asia, for example, with the EU, with the GCC, with Latin America. So we are trying to find ways to strengthen links with like-minded entities everywhere around the world.
If you look at global economy, we've seen that the growth this year was expected 3.2. Then it was revised to 2.8,
yes.
Now to 2.5. Some have revised it down even to 2.3.
Yeah.
And WTO said the other day that on goods, they even expect maybe a contraction of 1.5%. So trade used to be the driver of growth. I guess we need to find a different driver of growth moving forward. Could that be the new technologies? Could it replace trade? And how fundamental is the changing also on the trading landscape and the economic landscape? How do we avoid a sluggish growth for a decade to come like in the 70s?
I think trade will still exist. There is a move towards security, resilience, greater self-sufficiency, but frankly, no one can be completely self-sufficient. Trade will still be around. Maybe it will not grow as much as it used to, but I believe there will still be trade, but the patterns of trade will change and evolve. Different supply chains, different configurations, and for Singapore, we just want to remain competitive and relevant and stay at the center of these evolving trade links. So trade remains relevant, but changing patterns. Technology will be a new driver, I'm quite sure of that. I think the move towards sustainability will also be another driver. We all want to decarbonize, we want to get to net zero, we will need to harness new sources of clean and renewable power. We need to decarbonize industries. So both technology, new technologies, especially digital technologies and sustainability will power the economy of the future.
It's interesting we heard it this morning too, that digital trade is growing 8%,
yes,
while seeing trade in goods, manufactured goods, is almost peaking. We also see services are growing much faster.
Yeah.
I guess this is relatively good news for Singapore, though, because you're strong in services and you're strong on the digital and technology side.
We want to be strong in everything. But yes, we have some strengths. We have some strengths in financial services, logistics. We have some strengths in digital technologies, and we will continue to harness these strengths to stay competitive and relevant. Life is always difficult for a small country. History has never been kind to small nations. So we have to work extra hard compared to bigger countries to keep relevant and stay alive.
But the 60 last years have not been that bad for Singapore, though. It's a miracle, isn't it?
It's not, we think it's nothing short of a miracle, and so my mission is to keep this miracle going for as long as I can.
And it seems like the voters in Singapore approved by your policies. I think you increased your party's result with 6 percentage points.
I'm very grateful for their mandate.
Yeah, and not all incumbent parties can say that, at least not in Europe.
I can't speak about politics in Europe. I only care about, I can only manage the politics in my country, which is enough for me.
And managing politics in Singapore means that you also have to deal with the big players, because you're such an open economy. As I said at the beginning, through Singapore, you are the largest FDI, foreign direct investor, in China,
yes,
but I guess in many ASEAN countries too. And now you have to maneuver between your special friends in the US, yes, and in China. How do you balance that?
Yeah. Well, that's the favorite question that gets asked of Singapore in conferences like this. I'm surprised it took you a while to get to the question.
I wanted to warm you up and hope for a different answer, you know?
Well, the simple response is we have good relations with both. We have broad and substantial relations with both America and China. And I know everyone monitors and tracks what we say and what we do very closely, trying to parse every hidden meaning behind every word, behind every action, whether we are moving closer to one or the other. But that's not how we look at things. That's not the way we approach it.
And because currently we are in China too, so.
Yeah, I know. And maybe tomorrow when I'm in America, then they think differently. But our starting point is that we look at things from Singapore's point of view in advancing Singapore's national interest. Our interests are to have good relations on substance with both America and China. And we will continue to do whatever we need to do to promote and advance Singapore's interest. It's not about balancing between the two superpowers, but it's about being consistent and principled in advancing and promoting Singapore's interests. And that's what we will continue to do. And I think if we continue to do so in a consistent and principled manner, our partners, whether it's America or China or other countries, will see us more as a reliable and trusted partner that we can work with. I would say also that Singapore's position is not unique. We want to be friends with both America and China and to have good relations with them, cooperate on win-win areas. But it's not just us. All of Southeast Asia would like to do the same. And within ASEAN in particular, no single country in ASEAN may have that same size and scale. But when you add ASEAN up all together collectively, We are not small. We have considerable heft. We are 700 million people, a sizable economy. And ASEAN has the ability to shape its own destiny, to shape its own future. ASEAN was the arena for proxy wars during the Cold War. We don't want that to happen again. So ASEAN's approach is very clear. We reject zero-sum competition. We embrace engagement with not just America and China, but with other major powers. And we want all to be engaged in this region, in Southeast Asia. America is the largest investor still in Southeast Asia. China remains the largest trading partner. We want both to be actively engaged. We want other major powers to be actively engaged. And we want the region to be an open and inclusive arena where people have stakes in the region and we can all work together for shared prosperity. And ASEAN will work towards that objective.
But ASEAN is quite a diverse group too.
It is.
So,
hence the work to integrate and to make ASEAN stronger and more united.
How is the single market going?
Becoming better and better each and every day.
With baby steps or big steps?
Yeah, we will keep trying. I would say, if you think about it, there is already a very intricate supply chain connecting ASEAN. You can have, for example, cotton from the Philippines being spun in Thailand, dyed, and then stitched together into garments in Vietnam or Indonesia and exported to the world. And
shipped out of Singapore?
Possibly out of our ports, with HQ in Singapore, with R&D done in Singapore. So it's an entire ASEAN supply chain, which it already exists today, and we are continuing to find ways to bring down barriers. We are largely tariff-free today, but I think the barriers are also in non-tariff areas. And we are trying to find ways to bring down barriers, to integrate our economies, our payment systems, a whole range of things to make ASEAN more competitive and to offer ourselves as that single market to investors.
Prime Minister, you said that your role is to advance Singapore's interest and also to be a reliable partner. But is it more complex today because of the fragmented geopolitical landscape we're faced with to advance interest than in the past?
For sure. I readily acknowledge that. Yeah. My job is harder.
And sometimes you can end up between a rock and a hard place. But it doesn't seem like Singapore has ended up there so far.
So far, no, and we hope we won't end up there as well. If we end up in a hard place, it's not just us. Many other countries will also end up in a hard place, and I think the consequence of that will be disastrous for the world. So we hope we will never get there.
We were very close to almost a full-fledged war in the Middle East. It could have also ended up with spreading to the Gulf countries. Yes. And it seems like this is cooling or calming down.
We hope so.
Yes. And then we have, for the first time, a major war in Europe happening. How worried are you for the future that we could again see wars happening? And even if you're seeing sluggish economic growth today, just imagine if the war between Israel and Iran had spread and a closure of the Strait of Hormuz would have happened. It would have had devastating consequences. What can we do to mitigate the risks? And the NATO meeting is happening now, and they're increasing their aspirations to 5% of GDP to the military. Yeah. Who would have thought that? It was controversial. Last time I was at the NATO meeting, it was controversial to go up to 2%.
Yes. As I said just now, it's a different world because the accumulation of discontent against globalization, as well as a combination of recent experiences with COVID and security concerns have led to a situation where today security is a paramount concern of many countries. And so it's not just about military spending, it's about more resilient, more secure supply chains, for fear that along the way, if something were to happen, if push comes to shove, I need the supplies, but it's not forthcoming. And no country wants to end up in that position. So it's understandable that countries are concerned, governments are concerned, and responding to this concern. But I think we should have a care about abandoning the concept of economic integration, because integration cannot guarantee peace, but I think it certainly gives us a better chance for peace than a me-first approach. The more countries prioritize their own private national interest and allow the common global or shared interest to go down the drain, the more we will all be worse off. That lesson is so clear from history. So let's not repeat the mistakes of history.
I think that's it's a very important reminder. Coming back to the tariffs and trade, what has your dialogue with the U.S. administration been so far? What is Singapore faced with?
Well, we've got 10% tariffs.
That is relatively a good deal, though, isn't it? I heard about 140%, but I think that's now 50, isn't it?
Well, if you look at the facts, we have an FTA with America. America has a surplus with us. So on the basis of the FTA and the fact on the trade balance, we should have a 0 tariff, not a 10% tariff. But I think America has decided that 10% is their baseline tariff, and they are probably not going to go below 10%. So we have been engaging the officials, but that I think is their sort of mindset at this stage. But I know that other ASEAN countries have higher tariffs than us, and they have been also engaging their American counterparts. And we hope in time to come, when America makes a decision on the reciprocal tariffs, that it will be able to bring them down, at least closer to 10%, if not 10%. If indeed 10% is going to be the baseline applied to all countries.
And I think it's also important to remind ourselves that, we're getting used to 10%, but this
is still very high.
It's 3 times higher than it used to be on average from the US. So it's already quite substantial.
Yeah, that's why I've said that we are in a new era where there will be more barriers to trade. And we have to accept these realities. Not that we think it's a good idea, but these are the realities that we have to work with. And in the meanwhile, countries that would like to promote and advance the agenda for free trade should come together and work in different formats, different platforms, whether regional or plurilateral platforms, to advance the agenda for free trade. And Singapore will be the first to lead the charge on this.
Singapore has always been at the forefront also when it comes to technology. Just go to the port of Singapore and it is just mind-boggling what you're faced with. With Gen AI, with the robotics, with the synthetic biology, with also now satellites, but also space, there is so much happening. Some people say it's the second industrial revolution. This is as big as the industrial revolution. You can see increase in productivity with 10% in the coming decade if you apply Gen AI in the right way. Could you, when we're getting now at the end of this dialogue, say something about how do you assess the magnitude and the paradigm shift we're faced with in these technologies, and how do you position your own country to be at the forefront?
We think it's a major game changer. AI will be a major game changer. We, like all countries, would like to harness the benefits of technologies and AI to push the frontiers of our economy, raise productivity, and improve the lives of our people. But I would say that our focus is not just on what happens at the leading edge. There is a lot of media attention on where are the breakthroughs, which are the next unicorns, which are the next big, when will we get AGI, to materialize? All these are important conversations, no doubt.
Or a DeepSeek in Singapore.
Maybe, but we would like to harness AI in a different way, which is to make sure that the benefits are broad-based. Get every Singaporean, every company to really make full use of technology to improve and uplift themselves. And I'll give a simple example. When we embarked on our computerization drive in the 1980s, we had very few computers. My family, we weren't rich enough to have a computer, but the government made computers easily accessible to every Singaporean in community centers so we could learn, get used to it. In school, we had a computer club. It was very popular. Many of us would go there to play computer games, no doubt. But along the way, we learned, and we got familiar. And it's not just at the top end. Everyone became familiar with computers very quickly, and we could harness computers and new technologies to improve our lives, to be more productive, and to transform society. In the same way with AI, let's not get too obsessed with what's happening at the cutting edge. But how can I, as a government, harness AI effectively to transform my processes in government? How can businesses, big and small, even the small, medium enterprises, make full use of AI to improve their processes, to become more productive? And importantly, how can I get every worker to master AI tools and be familiar with AI tools to be more productive? That's what we are obsessed about.
I think that's a great aspiration. It's also about wealth trickling down,
yes,
and everyone benefiting from it. And I think that when I followed the election also in Singapore, I think at least my interpretation is one of the reasons why you did so well is we were addressing also practical challenges for the people in Singapore.
It has to be. It has to be. I mean, the
housing prices and all this.
A nation's progress has to be shared, felt, and experienced, and translated into improvements in the lives of people day by day. If it does not, there will be a disconnect, and the compact gets undermined, and societies don't hold together. And we don't want that to happen in Singapore.
And you saw the primaries in New York, maybe, this morning?
I've not been keeping track.
No, but I think we should look it up. That shows also that if things are not addressed, it can lead to also frustrations. But Prime Minister, so good to have you here.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed the discussion and also learning from your thoughts. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.